Gambling in one form or another has been part of human societies for centuries. Those wanting a betting opportunity could find one if they looked hard enough, but it was a far cry from the gambling bombardment we're exposed to in our Western world today. Australians lose more than 30 billion a year to gambling, and new figures showed New South Wales residents lost 2.5 billion on the pokies alone in just 3 months in 2025. The barrage of odds, ads, and the growing prevalence of gambling influences can feel inescapable, drawing millions of young men into a dangerous game with virtually no winners. Dr. Michael Zhang is a psychologist specialising in behavioural addictions. His work has led to the creation of Incumental, a new app designed to support gambling recovery. He says it's not about willpower, it's about learning new ways to respond, building new habits, and finding people who understand. This is Dr. Michael Zhang.
Welcome to Young Blood, the volunteer video podcast dedicated to young men's mental health. I'm your host, Cal McPherson, and this is a platform for young men and their loved ones to share lived experience stories and show that no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Suicide is the number one killer of young people, and changing that starts with speaking up. So let's do it. This show touches on some tough topics that may provoke strong emotions. If you find anything in this chat distressing, please do whatever you need to do to look after yourself.
Michael, can you break down what a behavioural addiction is and how it differs from other addictions?
Absolutely. So I was trained as a psychologist, so I kind of have a sense of things from a clinical perspective, but also from the perspective of experience and kind of more common sense. So when I think about a behavioral addiction generally, I actually like to focus on gambling as an example to highlight what we're seeing across most other addictions too. So what we see when there's a behavioral addiction, or gambling in this case, is you start feeling these urges that you never had before. Urges to gamble or urges to engage in any other behavior that may become addictive. And then you have to ask, where did these urges come from, and why am I experiencing them, and why can't I get them to go away? Because these urges are the ones that are ultimately driving the choices to gamble or not, or to, again, substitute gambling with any other behavior there, if we're talking more generally about behavioral addictions. And then you wonder, hey, there's kind of, when the urge comes, it almost feels like there's a voice that's driving that choice. It's just compelling you, and it feels so strong. And then surely you're also saying to yourself, yeah, it feels this way, and then it feels like I don't have a choice. Maybe part of you, when you're reflecting on it, you can also say it doesn't feel the healthiest either when you're in that mode. So I think what happens with a behavioral addiction or with a gambling addiction is you have your choices get constrained as a consequence. These urges start to take over, and then it feels like you have no choice. And then you're left wondering, well, how do I even come out of this? Because I've worked with many people who struggled with gambling as well as other behavioral addictions. And that's the hardest thing. It's like trying to figure out, how in the world do I come out of this? Like, I didn't have this before. Now that I've got this, you try so hard to reflect on what's going on. You try so hard to figure out, how do I undo this? How do I become unstuck? It feels like I'm trapped in this. How do I get out of this trap? And it's just so hard as a result. And that's kind of a consequence of, as well, that behavioral addiction developing over time and becoming an addiction for somebody. And I say that, and it's happening more and more across gambling, very much so for the young men all over the world right now. It's devastating, and it's only going to get worse. But also across other addictions too that are tied in. Pretty much, we say behavioral addiction. Look at every behavioral addiction or every digital addiction. It's tied in with some form of industry, and it's tied in with some sort of product. So then you're looking at it and you're thinking, all right, so things are getting worse and worse, and then it's getting harder and harder. And then where are the solutions to all of these behavioral addictions?
How does it compare to substance addiction?
It's interesting. I've worked with clients when I worked at a specialized gambling treatment clinic for about 5 years. I've worked with clients who've had both those addictions and gambling. So almost all of them have said, you know what? Gambling is the worst addiction. Almost all of them have said that who've experienced, the combination of those. And they just say because it just ruins everything potentially in your life. Because it touches on money. And then when money's involved, I mean, you can just start drawing the web. It connects to all parts of mental health, all parts of physical health, all parts of financial health, all parts of professional health and personal well-being. And I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's interesting that the folks who have experienced alcohol or substance and gambling addictions, almost all of them have said gambling is not just worse, it is far worse and far more devastating. And especially now, I mean, we're seeing certain things happening in the world where it seems like there's kind of a shift taking place from alcohol and substance to more of these digital behavioral types of addictions. And specifically with gambling, again, with the young men, it's almost like they're being socialized into it now. In generations past, there was definitely a more of a sense of shame and stigma maybe around gambling behavior or activity. But now what we're seeing is the opposite. We're seeing that there's almost like it's being glamorized, this socialization into gambling. It's being normalized, and especially in sports betting context, and applying that to something that is very relatable. But we're watching sports, we're enjoying it, we're living almost vicariously in a sense. Our team, our players, are they winning? What are they struggling with? We're supporting them, we're fans. And then we're seeing something where you add sports betting into that, and it's just creating something that it's going to become worse and worse. And I hate to say that, but that's the reality of what's going on in the world.
And there's a social element to it, particularly the way that it's marketed here in Australia is that it's something that you do with your friends to bond with your mates. What's wrong with that?
My issue is with how it's being delivered and kind of how we're being taken advantage of by the system. And if I may, I'd like to describe how I view the system in which this is taking place. So you have basically the gambling industry in places that it's legalized, and then you've got the governments that regulate them. So whatever jurisdictions may regulate the industry, but that also collect taxation revenue from the gambling industry. And then you've got organizations that play a role in this as well, providing responsible gambling or gambling support programs to help people who may be struggling, who may have an addiction or a diagnosis of a gambling disorder, who just may need extra help because it's really affecting them in devastating ways. And then I think about this system, and then we have people who I would say playing a role in this without being aware of everything that's kind of going on in the background and what's going on in that system that they're a part of. So what I like to do is try to figure out, okay, we have whole populations now that are in this system, and how does this system work? So let's follow the money to try to figure that out. You have basically the population of people who may be participating in gambling activities, whatever they may be. There's many different gambling activities available now. And technology has definitely enabled even more gambling options for folks. And so we have people who are gambling who are basically a part of that revenue that the industry has. And then we have from the industry, percentage of that is the taxation revenue that benefits the regulating bodies. So the governments, the jurisdictions, whoever they may be, that benefits them. You see, if we talk about Australia, I mean, just recently I saw an article about how we had the highest recorded pokies losses in New South Wales in the recent quarter ever.
I mentioned that in the intro for this episode, which was that New South Wales residents lost 2.5 billion on the pokies in 3 months in 2025.
It's unbelievable. And again, as I'm explaining this system, we'll kind of see more and more what's going on, I hope. And Now, unfortunately, I hate to say, but it's what's happening. You look at the areas that were most affected. If you break it down, it's areas in Western Sydney where I'm actually from. So for me, it's not personal in the sense that I've never had a gambling problem myself, but it's very personal when I think about this is affecting people in Western Sydney from Fairfield or Bankstown or Cumberland areas. And it is something that, and if you look at those same areas, it's also a lot of people that maybe are struggling with their financial situation already. And it's definitely not something that they need. And yet it's happening the worst to them. So for me, it does feel very personal in that sense when I think about how the system works. And, coming back to that. So then you have regulators who have to provide certain funding, we call it responsible gambling funding or whatever other funding to organizations that provide the support for people who are struggling from gambling problems and difficulties. When you think about that, you basically have a massive industry when it comes to gambling revenue, and then a good amount of that going towards the taxation revenue, and then a very, very small amount after that going towards these programs that are supposed to help. And that funding is what makes these programs and services and treatments and research, it's what makes them free, but also free when it's free, it's also too late, it's also only partially effective, and it's also tied to the gambling industry a few steps removed, basically. So this system to me is quite problematic, and it's something that I don't think we reflect upon enough, especially the impact that it's having, whether in Australia or in the United States where I'm living now, or really all over the world. I've met people from all over the world who have been saying the same thing is happening where I am, and we need real solutions. We don't need some sort of social laundering happening where we're like trying to make it seem like this funding is actually doing good to help people when it's done a lot more harm. And I think that, you could, depending on who you talk to, I'm sure there'll be arguments on both sides, but at the end of the day, to me, that's really what it looks like. It's a form of social laundering, kind of similar to money laundering that's happened in casino venues, where you're basically trying to make the system look better than it actually is in terms of the impact that it's having for the benefit of people.
Well, the government relies on gambling revenue profits so much that they just turn a blind eye to it because they know how much it would have impact their bottom line if they actually did what they should do and ban advertising and put things in place to try to actually limit it. And because those gambling companies are in bed with government, and then you've got the main sporting bodies who are doing the same, and it's just so deeply entrenched and there's so much money involved, and corruption and greed is that same old story. And unfortunately, the general public are the ones who are suffering on a daily basis and are just sort of being led to the slaughter and hung out to dry and viewed as though, or they're doing it to themselves. So it's your own fault. And meanwhile, while there's this growing voice online of people talking about the truth of what's happening and saying that things need to change, there's this counter narrative being pushed by those involved in gambling, which is, no, it's just a bit of fun. Like there's this very small percentage of people who can't handle it, but that's always going to be the case. And really trivial things like set bet limits. And
Yeah.
after every gambling ad, there's the responsible gambling message mumbled afterwards, and it's just like so redundant, and everyone knows that it's bullshit and it's being sold to them, and they're continuing to buy it, and it's continuing to do harm, but nothing changes. And here in South Australia, we've recently had the social media ban for under 16-year-olds, so no one under 16 can have a social media account, but we won't ban gambling advertising. And so on one hand, the government's saying, what we're doing to protect the young people by not letting them have social media accounts. And then the counter argument is, yeah, what about gambling? What are you doing to protect young people from gambling? Because we've got more teenagers and more people in their early 20s gambling than ever by a long shot. And if anything, it's just growing hugely on a continual basis.
To your point, I mean, there's a complete conflict of interest there, and it is something that it's almost like how would I say it? It's like responsible gambling is gaslighting. That's probably how I would put it. They're kind of like gaslighting the public and the people into saying, yeah, well, just take more responsibility. We'll kind of figure this out. But then we're not really going to give you the solutions either, because research that the industry or the government may be funding, I mean, that's not solving the problem. I don't see those solutions. There can't be real solutions, because if there were, you would solve yourselves out of existence. That's not going to happen. And it's unfortunately how the system works and how the game is being played. The beast is hungry, and then it's already gotten a taste, and it needs more and more, and it's not going to go in the other direction. So then what can be done? And I like to think that I'm trying to do something, to tackle this in a different way, that we can actually get some real solutions, or we can actually get some really effective ways of supporting people that are outside of this system. Because I mean, a lot of people, when they have the gambling experience, they'll say something like, oh, this is rigged, this is so I can't believe what's going on, like, surely there's no way you can win. But I mean, yeah, there is no way you can win, but then they also feel that there is a way that they could win, and that's what kind of motivates them to keep going. But the reality is, when I think about the system and the game that's being played, the the game isn't actually rigged. Like, it's set up in a random design, and you actually can, like, whatever happens is unpredictable and all of that. So in that sense, it's not rigged. In the other sense, like, yeah, if you keep gambling, yeah, you're going to keep losing over a longer period of time. Yes, because of how House Edge works mathematically. But
Yeah.
the game isn't rigged. The system is, though. The system is rigged, and that's the concern that I think that we're discussing now, and that I would like people to be more aware of, and kind of just see, like, hey, we're playing within this system, and do we even want to be playing this game? Like, what game are we playing, really? What are the factors that are involved, and how is it gaslighting me, and how is it almost leading me to, like, have almost like a weird trauma bonding experience with gambling, that I never really wanted this. They started gambling. That's never how it starts. It always starts, for folks who end up, having real struggles and real problems. It always starts so innocently with those winning experiences that create basically that whole trajectory, that if you keep going in it, I mean, it becomes easier and easier to convince yourself to gamble. So I would say, like, winning is the culprit. And that's what it really could be. Anybody. Anybody could, develop a gambling problem or addiction potentially. Because for me, I say I was fortunate, because my first time gambling, guess what happened? I lost money. And my wife's great aunt, she invited me to come with her to the casino, and then she's like, "Come watch this. Come see what I'm going to put $20. Come see what happens." I'm like, "All right, I'm here. I'm watching what's happening. Money's going down, 20, 15, 10, 0." And I'm like, "Oh, this was a waste. So why do we do this? This is not worth it at all." But the opposite could have easily happened to me.
If you got out at $20 down, you'd be one of the most successful gamblers of all time, I reckon.
Here's the issue. If you won, then it becomes very memorable.
Oh,
Very powerful. Like, it has this effect on you. Like, winning in anything, winning whether you're playing sports, or winning a deal, or winning whatever it may be in life. You feel something that then teaches you a couple of things. It teaches you, hey, wait, you can win. Maybe contrary to what I've heard before, you can win on gambling. People always say, no, gambling is, you're always going to lose. But that's not what happened to me. My experience says something different. And guess what? It feels bloody amazing. And it was easy money. And as a result, it is worth repeating. So it becomes so much easier to convince yourself to gamble again, despite your losses.
yeah. And that's why it's so insidious, because if you really couldn't win, it wouldn't be a problem, and everyone wouldn't do it, right?
Exactly.
The fact is, there is a chance that you can win. There is a very small chance that you can win big off of peanuts. And that's what drives people, because especially if they've seen it happen before, just once, to other people, or particularly themselves. You touched on it there. The absolute worst thing that could happen to someone is to go to the pokies or go to the races or whatever it is and put a bet on and have it come through. That's the worst thing that can happen to someone, because then your brain immediately starts that association between gambling and automatic, easy money, and I got the rush of it as well. How easy was that? That's great. So versus, okay, I got to go to work all week to make
Yeah.
$1,000 or whatever. Hold on, I could just win that right now just by pressing this button or handing this money over, and out comes 10 times that money on the other side of it. Like, why wouldn't I just keep doing this? And unless you actually had a winning experience, you'd be like, well, that's not going to happen. Then when it happens, your brain just goes like, oh, right, that's repeatable. I can easily just do that again and again. And then guess what? You keep doing it and you're not winning. But because your brain remembers, oh, that one time we won, this gambler's fallacy, which is you get closer all the time. And that's why it's particularly the machines being rigged and wired to play on that, where near misses and losing, in most other contexts, that would make you not want to do the behavior. But with gambling, the near misses and I almost won, I almost got what I wanted, that just reinforces it stronger and stronger and tricks you into thinking that it's getting closer. You're getting closer to that win when you're not. And it's totally random and unpredictable. But the brain's wiring, especially once you've had that positive experience in the past, just gets stronger and stronger of, oh, it must just be around the corner. I need that hit again where I win, because the rush of it is so extraordinary compared to most other things in life, similar to drugs. I believe, and I'd like to talk about the psychology of it a bit with the dopamine system, but I think that the rush side of it, the circuitry, the impact on the circuitry in the brain is similar to cocaine and amphetamines.
You touched on so many truths there about what's really going on, especially when you hear kind of that voice, like convincing yourself, like, as you kind of explain, right? Like it becomes so much easier to convince yourself to gamble. That one part of you compared to that other part that's I really know that it's not going to work out deep down. I do, but I just no, I don't, and it's just that sort of tension that I think can be very powerful on somebody. And especially when you add in, you ask this question, right? So winning is one thing, but winning money is another thing. And then you also have to ask, okay, what does winning mean to you in general? Could it mean more things than just money, than just, oh, I want some money and therefore, look, that was easier money than I'm working, so many more hours for the same amount. I mean, and oftentimes it is. That's the thing, right? And you touched on this as well. So I would ask, what is the meaning of winning? And then also, what are some of the unmet needs there, in your life at a psychological level, when you break it down, that are part of this cycle? And it's different for everybody. I think for some people, you'll have certain needs, a validation that they really feel gambling is giving them, and then for others that they may not have that same. So, and then I'd also kind of would ask, like, what are the unfulfilled wants? What is it that you're really wanting out of gambling that clearly you're not getting, but you don't see it clearly because it's clouded in your experience? And when it comes to gambling, it's about chasing wins, and we can replace wins with dopamine hits as well, right? So we can say chasing wins, but I would also, a lot of people would just say the dopamine, but I would say we're also chasing worth. I think that's a big piece to this, and how we're experiencing our worth in our psychological existence. So, an important question that I would ask is, like, what do we really, like, what do you really need? What do you really want? And that's kind of the question that I like to unpack with with clients that I've worked with in the therapy and counseling room, and also just with anybody who's struggling with these issues. But to your point about changes in the brain, right? You basically have gambling hijacking the reward system in the brain, and then as a result, it's become rewired, and so that what is actually the problem is perceived as the solution. So it's like the solution is to keep gambling, and then that's part of the convincing yourself as well, which again is that kind of voice that you'll hear when you're experiencing it, and the thoughts and the belief system behind that. But what I would say is kind of like, when it comes to what happens throughout this process, yes, that makes it so much harder, right, to break free, to come out of this trap. But can you still do it? Can you kind of we talked about, the gambling hijacking the brain's reward system. Can you hijack it from the hijackers? Yes, you can. It's very hard, but you can hijack it back. It's been rewired as a result of this whole process. And over time, the rewiring is definitely stronger than it was when you started with gambling. Can you rewire it again? Yes, you can. It just means it's a lot harder. And it's not fair. It's definitely not fair at all, right? But it's the reality of how we actually overcome this. Yes, we can hijack it back. Yes, we can rewire it. Yes, we can retrain the brain and our experience of, I would say, our experience of recovery from this whole process. And as a result, that experience, that recovery experience, can eventually outweigh and overwhelm and overpower the gambling experience and all the dynamics that play a role in that. It can happen, and it's very hard. Go talk to anybody about what it's like overcoming a gambling addiction or problem, and they'll tell you how bloody hard it is, but it is possible. And that's what gives me so much hope, that I've worked with hundreds of clients who've been able to get to the point, again, not easily, but they got to the point where they've gambled. The average was over $100,000 across their lifetime. And they get to the point where they're making progress, and then it becomes easier to make the recovery choices and to be in the recovery mode. And then they get to the point where, again, over time, just like gambling over time becomes a problem, recovery over time is the solution. And then they end up buying properties. Then they end up, starting businesses. And then it's just amazing what can happen out of it. And then they often say, it's funny, they often say afterwards, I hated my gambling, but I also did gain something out of how bad that experience was, and it helped me grow into the life that I have now. And it's a funny thing to say, but it's also, I would say, it's primarily because of their efforts and because of their approach and how they committed themselves to this process of progress.
Elaborate on the connection between gambling and worth that you touched on before, because what came to mind was, ironically, I'd say nothing makes you feel more worthless than gambling.
That is an excellent point, because when you have all those losses and you're thinking about, hey, just how much damage this has done to you, just how much it's done to your loved ones who may not even know about the gambling, which is often the case, especially earlier on into the problem, you definitely may be feeling that way. And again, that's all contingent on the losses and the way that they add up and the impact that has on you. And you're just like, well, and those are the times where you may feel depressed and you may feel very stressed and anxious, and the full range of negative emotional and psychological experience that could be a part of that, a part of the losing outcomes and consequences. But then look at the other side. What happens, even though it may not last, even though it may be temporary? What happens when you win in some of those moments? And it may be fleeting. And if you really unpack it, for some, it definitely is a sense of feeling like, hey, I'm getting a boost to my self-esteem. I'm getting a boost to my sense of validation. Maybe I don't feel like I'm enough. Maybe I don't feel like I'm worthy. Maybe I feel alone, that nobody's with me, nobody gets me, or whatever it may be. And in those moments, when you have those feelings, again, I come back to this. What's it like when you're winning, like in a sporting event? What's it like when you're winning, when you have when you make a deal? What's it like when you're winning in any area of your life? What does that feel in those moments? Do you feel a sense of validation? Do you feel a sense of worth? And oftentimes you do in those moments. And I would say in those moments, it's like you've outsourced your sense of self-worth to gambling. It's like gambling. You can decide, my worth. You can decide how much of it I feel. Very kind of bizarre, like, dynamic that you'd be experiencing with the gambling relationship. And I call it that because it really often is a relationship, even though that may sound bizarre to people. And as a result, you don't have that real internal sense or source of self-worth, and gambling has taken it from you too. And maybe for some people, other sources in their life and other experiences in their life also impacted on that. Maybe there's trauma, maybe there's neglect, maybe there's, other adverse childhood experiences that kind of created that context for someone to feel that way to begin with. But no matter who it is, gambling is taking more of that worth from you, even though it seems to be giving you a little bit of a boost here and a little bit of a boost there.
Yeah, you lose self-worth from gambling. And then to try to restore the self-worth, you gamble because you think, well, now I'm guilty and I'm full of shame because I lost all this money gambling. The only way to fix that is if I win the money back gambling, then I won't have to feel bad. And then one of two things happen. You either lose more, likely,
Yeah.
or you do win it back, right? But then because of your brain being overpowered by this very powerful, very insidious relationship, I would say 10 times out of 10, what happens if you win your money back that you desperately wanted to win back and you have a gambling problem? You're going to continue gambling and you're going to lose. The system is set up for people to fail because, yeah, in reality, yes, you can win from gambling. And that's what drives the whole beast. And there are people out there, just like there's people who can drink alcohol, just like there's people who can do a line of cocaine, just like there's people who can have sex with one partner without having the need to run off and find 100 others. We're all different. And there's some people who could win a small amount of money gambling and be like, oh, that was fun. Take the money, leave, not think about it again. Then there's other people who it doesn't matter how much money they won or lost, it would never be enough. Like that old adage, one is too many, 1,000 is never enough. I think that applies very strongly here as it does with drug use, that, yeah, even if you satisfy that story in your head of, oh, here's this entity or this thing that I have this relationship with that sort of drives me, that has this power over me, and I can sate it by, if I just achieved what I want and I won that money back and didn't have to feel the shame, then I could be free of it. And then if by some miracle you actually achieve that, you're going to probably find that you're going to put the money back into whatever it is because it's got power over you that's hard to explain how strong it can be. And I've had conversations with quite a lot of people with this problem.
Well put. I think you're exactly right. And it's pretty close to 10 out of 10. If that's happened to you and you've won a sizable amount of money, maybe for a few days, you said, you know what, that's it. That's my retirement from gambling. Well, you're going to come out of retirement. I'm sorry. You're almost 10 out of 10. You're coming out of retirement and it's going to be a lot sooner than you may have thought, because then you realize, well, if I won that amount of money, why can't I do that and then some? Why can't I try to win back more of what I've lost? If that's even on your mind, because oftentimes it's, oh, I just hit a reset. I hit a reset because I just won this amount of money. This is my status of gambling now. My status of gambling is I'm not considering all the amounts I've lost before. Now I've won this large amount of money, and that's where I'm at.
But say in that scenario, so someone's won back the money they've lost and then they've said, okay, great, now I don't have to feel bad about myself and I can just leave it alone. And then those thoughts come back in that drive comes back in to go and do it. And inevitably they probably will. What would you say is driving that? Is that the longing for that dopamine release, that rush, something that you're conscious of, or just like your brain, once you've unlocked that level of rush, sort of saying, feed me that level of release again?
That sort of feed me mentality that comes from that is so powerful. And it comes back to what I said at the outset. It's about the urge. When you develop this urge and when it becomes potent, when it has power, it's almost like then you have a monster, to use another analogy, that's inside of you that kind of grows from this experience, and that manifests itself in these urges. And these urges, it's just so hard to get rid of them, because ultimately I believe what happens is you get to the point where you have to realize the common sense solution here isn't going to work. The common sense solution would be, hey, we'll just take you out of gambling and then you'll be fine. And this common sense solution has been applied in several different ways. I'll give you some examples. So they have programs called self-exclusion. I'm sure some of the folks listening would know about these programs where basically you go and sign up. By the way, these are some of those programs that have to be offered within the within the system, right? Like you have to offer these programs so that folks who are struggling can have the option to say, I want you to enforce my self-exclusion so that I cannot enter a gambling venue that I've self-excluded from. That's an example of like trying to take you out of gambling. Another example of trying to take you out of gambling is like using blocking software if you're on sports betting apps or otherwise gambling online. And sure, they can be effective as well, but then you can always find ways around this too, this blockage that you've created for yourself. And then a third example, which I think is really interesting, COVID-19 pandemic. What happened when the venues all shut down? It's like everyone went into instantaneous remission from gambling, whether it was addiction or not, just from gambling in general. And I was working at that specialized gambling treatment clinic during that period, and folks would say, well, this is great. I feel like this is part of my recovery now. Like I'm good. I don't need gambling anymore. And it lasted months in some, I think there were a couple of lockdowns at that particular time. It lasted months at least. And folks were like, I'm done with gambling. Almost all of them went back to it. So even though those folks I'm talking about, they were in active treatment and counseling too, and they still went back to it. And because ultimately, here's what I believe, like the solution isn't about taking you out of gambling. It's about taking gambling out of you. And that's a very, very real psychological journey and experience that if you look, again, go look at the way the system works, go look at existing solutions, go look at what the research says, go look at what clinical best practices are. I don't see enough of it in any of those settings.
Can you just explain exactly what you mean by take the gambling out of you?
Taking the gambling urge that you obviously have, the monster that's kind of come to life within you, that then it almost feels like it's in control of you. Getting to the point where we can create a distance from that, a detachment from it, ultimately a divorce as well, where you're not influenced then by the urges in the same way. I know this sounds extreme, right? But the reality is this: people who go through a lengthy recovery process and journey, they can get to the point where they face all of the gambling opportunities that are available and accessible to them. Options galore. You could really gamble anytime now as a result of technology. And you could really gamble on anything now as well. There's so many things. I mean, now you even have prediction markets that you can gamble on so many more things than are even traditionally available. But ultimately, it's about, can we get to the point where everything is still here, but now that's out of my system. Now I don't have that desire anymore. Now that urge is gone, and it doesn't even come back. And when I start to feel an inkling of it, it's like, nah, no way.
Yeah. It's got to be that way, because you're never going to escape the opportunities to gamble in our world.
You can't
today. There's just more and more, because we've just gamified everything, and now you can bet on whether or not Zelensky's going to wear a suit in the next meeting with Trump. It's just like crazy. And especially here in Australia, like I'm very struck by it. If you drive home from work, you're going to drive past like 6 venues that have pokies, and you're going to drive past those green TAB signs fucking every single place that you go to. And so the approach of, I'm just not going to go near anywhere that there's gambling isn't going to work, because it's impossible to avoid them. Even if you stay in your own house, it doesn't matter, because it's on your phone, it's on everything. It's on social media. So yeah, it's got to be that internal change in you, because unfortunately we're not going to change our society so that we're not seeing this everywhere.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's also not fair, right? Like now this has happened. It's happened within that system, and ultimately that system isn't there to help you. So ultimately you got to be able to help yourself, or figure out what solutions will work for you. And so many people have done it outside of that system to great effect, and but it's completely unfair. It's like earlier we talked about, like, getting part of the problem is you find yourself more easily convincing yourself to gamble despite the losses, despite the negative consequences you've had, despite those that you may even have anticipated will happen again. And it's about getting to the point where it can become easier and easier for you to convince yourself to recover instead of to gamble. So I think that that is really what is needed to get to the point where you can take gambling out of you. Again, I'm talking about something going from one extreme to the other extreme, but that is the journey that needs to take place if you really want to get to the point where you get it out of your system.
So how do you go about doing that day to day?
This is where the app that I've developed and built comes in, because when I was working with clients at the gambling clinic, something that they told me was we never really wanted to ever come to therapy. Like when we started gambling, we never thought we would never even envision this as a possibility. And before we even came to the clinic, we were looking for every or any way that was available to stop gambling or to help ourselves out of gambling, and to find something that would be a private solution to a private problem. Do you think they found it? I mean, no, that they didn't find it because the system doesn't provide it. And out of the solutions that were available, a lot of them took a one-size-fits-all approach that didn't necessarily resonate with a lot of the clients, who then ultimately, when they hit the rock bottom, beneath the rock bottom, then they end up, maybe in counseling or therapy. But what they really helped me understand was therapy and counseling can be helpful, can be amazing, can be very supportive. At most, it's probably 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week, and they're probably not in their gambling mode when they're in counseling. They're in their recovery mode. So when they're in their recovery mode, are they feeling urges to gamble? No, they're not. So I would say out of thousands of sessions that I had there, I just remember one session where a client was like, wow, I actually feel the urge to gamble right now. Just one session out of thousands of sessions that I had. It's interesting because when you're having the urges, they're occurring in the real world, outside of that setting, when you may more easily enter the gambling mode for all the reasons that we've discussed today. And in real time, it's about how do we address that, especially when the problem is so accessible. I mean, you said earlier, if you stay at home, it's accessible. No matter where you go, what you do, it's going to be accessible to you, okay? So for me, it's about how can we expand that low to no urge state that someone feels when they're in their recovery mode, when they're in therapy, when they're kind of having that recovery experience. How can we take that and apply it anytime, anywhere, making it as accessible to someone who's experiencing a gambling problem, making the solution as accessible as the problem is? And that's where my clients truly inspired me to create Incumental, where we have a variety of collections that are targeted to different profiles of people who are experiencing different psychological and behavior profiles of the gambling experience, and that are able to make recommendations to folks in the moment when they need it. Okay, here are the sort of sessions that may be helpful. We call them guided recovery sessions that are just short form, on demand, a few minutes long, that can combat the urge very actively to gamble. So it's like having that available to them in those moments to try to break the urge ultimately can be very helpful. What I said obviously comes in the form of an app, but any other way that can be done is also recommended. So however it works for you, whatever tools you've had, because this app is something we've just created. What about all the folks who've overcome gambling before they had this app? What did they do, right? And it would be a similar process. It's how did you basically package the content of your experience to try to convince yourself, I'm not going to gamble, that I'm going to focus on my recovery. And what did you gravitate towards in those moments? And it was probably a form of strategic regret is what I would say it is. It's like, well, I know I'm going to regret it afterwards for all of these reasons. Let me bring that regret forwards. let me feel that now. Let me feel the sting and the pain before I experience the sting. And that's more of a broad recommendation, right? Like how is it that it's going to work for you? It's going to be different for everybody, I would say, but maybe similar for everybody as well, because you have to be able to let that strategic regret play out in some sense for you to say, well, because I know that I'm going to feel that later, I'm actually feeling the regret now. I'm not even going to do it now. So there's no reason for me to go. And that takes away all of the justifications, the rationalizations, and everything else that makes it easier to convince yourself to gamble. And that's just a basic tool, that anyone could come up with themselves. And what I've tried to do is come up with a bigger version of it that makes it just makes it a lot easier. Because like I said, I know how hard it is. I know how hard this journey is of having a gambling problem or addiction, whatever we want to call it. So I want to make it easier because I've seen it up close and personal with my clients. And for that reason, it does feel very personal to me to see how much suffering this has caused and that is causing all over the world. And a lot of it's silent too. So ultimately, how can I make it easier for folks? I've tried to do this.
It's so good. It's so needed, these sorts of services that bridge that gap, because there is just that massive divide where, like you said, if you've jumped through all the hoops and you get a psychologist, which is a process that can take 6 months in the first place and is expensive, at most you're going to be talking to someone for an hour a week, which is hugely beneficial. I recommend just about everyone do it. Even if they don't have an addiction, it's going to be helpful in some way, but there's a barrier to entry there. There's hoops that you have to jump through. That person's not accessible 24/7, and then it's only an hour out of your week. And versus, especially initially, you're going to be getting this bombardment of those urges every hour potentially of the day. So you need somewhere to turn to in between time. Are you thinking like people who have this problem will then develop a relationship with Incumental instead? Is that part of it?
Maybe temporarily, right? But ultimately, it's about developing the relationship you need with yourself to live the life that to grow out of gambling and grow into the life that you need, that you deserve. Ultimately, that's what it's about. That's my philosophy as a psychologist. It's also my philosophy as a founder. I'm not interested in developing a relationship in the sense of, let's make you a customer in perpetuity, like the gambling industry wants to make you a customer in perpetuity. Desire, right? Yeah. Yeah, we have too much now, unfortunately. But, so for me as well, it's about when I think about what I've done, I've operated, and we've talked about the system today. I've operated outside of the system entirely because I didn't want to be a part. I've seen the conflicts of interest. I remember very distinctly a lot of my colleagues around me at that same clinic I mentioned, they were saying, what's going on here now that we've been funded to provide services in all of these regions? Now we've got these folks who are coming in who have no clinical experience telling us how to do the work that we're doing. It doesn't make much sense. And so when I kind of saw this happening, I was like, you know what? You're right. Because if you play in the system, then you're never going to be able to really do what the people need, like what it is that will ultimately could work for them, what it is that could ultimately help them come out of that system themselves too and get gambling outside of them. So, for me, that's why I did it entirely independently, because I'm like, I'm not going to play that game. And also I want to encourage others to not play that game either, because they don't have your best interests at heart. In reality, I actually do. Yeah. And I'm saying that genuinely because I'm a psychologist. So why do you think I entered this career? I genuinely have your best interest at heart when it comes to how do we solve this problem. And ultimately, the solution doesn't lie within Incumental. The solution lies within you. That's at the end of the day, the truth of the matter.
Okay.
However we can help to empower you is what we would like to do.
Yeah. So the Incumental is being designed as a vehicle for people to go on that journey of self-discovery and have something to equip themselves with against this very difficult force that they end up having to fight with, essentially. It's like somewhere to turn in the moment when people are having that urge and feeling like they need to go and feed the beast, so to speak, go into the app, and right when they need it, they can have an alternative voice.
That's right. that will hopefully make it a bit easier, knowing how hard it already is to overcome those urges. And we have other tools that are all designed with this in mind, knowing that these urges, the underlying problem, and we've discussed how the urge ties into the experience, the brain, and all of that. But the urge ultimately is the underlying problem, and coming out of that is the ultimate solution for everybody. And we're just trying to facilitate that to the extent that we can. So it makes it easier to convince yourself to recover.
And this app's launching soon, or
It's in the process of launching currently. So depending on where you're listening to this and when you're listening to it, you probably could access it on either the App Store or the Play Store right now. But this wasn't like, oh, I'm a psychologist and I'm going to design this. And no, it was ultimately co-designed with the voice of the people, right? Like the people who are struggling. Like, what is it that you need? What is it that is going to help you the most? And you know, what are the features in the app that may facilitate that? And one of those things I think is amazing is peer support coaching. So we actually have also folks that are on the app who've gone through this, you know, who know what it's like, who are prepared to kind of guide and to coach and to offer what's needed, you know, to kind of get through that journey. So I love seeing that, by the way. I love seeing like when people who've gone through this journey, they want to give back and they want to help as many people as they can because they know how hard it is, because they know how unfair it is. They know how much they suffered and they know how much others are suffering. It just warms my heart to see that and to see people being willing to come on and to help others in this way. It's kind of building that community as well and really helping people in the moments that they need it, because everyone's, you know, ultimately I believe in a sort of recovery optionality, you know, and solution accessibility. So, you know, what are the options that are available? I mean, we've already talked about some of those in the system. Now we've talked about some of those out of the system. What are all the ones that are available? Some will work for others and some won't. And then it's ultimately about what works best for you. How can we tailor that to you? And Incumental does take more of that approach as well. It's about, we have specialized content and resources. We have customized solutions and features. And we want to facilitate a personalized journey and experience for users. But there's other options available as well. Maybe some of those options that we talked about earlier, maybe they will work for some people. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what works. I think there are some better solutions than others, but if it's a solution for you, have at it, you know, and if it works for you, then let's make the most out of it. And if it helps you grow you, then I'm proud of you. It's amazing. You know, I love that, but I just want to make something accessible, you know, as much as the gambling is accessible to people. And that's ultimately what drove Incumental, because I know those urges happen at the most inconvenient of times for people, right? 2:00 in the morning. Who are you going to call? You know, you're not going to be able to schedule a counseling session. You can go call the helpline. They're not going to direct you to anything that you probably don't already know. Okay, what's actually going to work in those moments when you need it? And hopefully Incumental can help, you know, people when they're in those moments struggling, high risk, you know?
yeah, and it needs to be accessible like that, and the peer-to-peer support has to be accessible like that. In the same way that sports betting is accessible like that. Because if you wake up at 2 in the morning and you've got that urge, and you can go to Incumental and you can speak to someone who's been there and they can chat to you for 5 minutes and then you go back to sleep, you can do that.
Perfect.
Versus you go and bet on Korean ping pong, and it's one or the other.
Perfect. And you know, it's funny you say that, because that contrast, right, with the example from the outset of our conversation today of kind of more of a socialized activity of gambling. Well, what happens when it gets to its extreme is it's not social anymore. Okay. It is completely independent, alone. It's just something that you're trying to hide, usually very private, and you're unlikely doing that with other folks when it gets to that level, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, what you've created is a real credit to you. And obviously it's coming from this very genuine place and something that is really, really needed. And I love the sound of having that peer-to-peer woven into it, because from the people that I've known who've managed to get this under control, they've all said that it's been talking to other people who get it, who've been there, and having that access and being able to speak to them in those moments. And then also just during the week, that's really made the difference, rather than not that therapy and stuff hasn't helped and that's not part of it, but just other people who get it and having access to them. And when you're going up against something where there's 24/7 access and it's everywhere, to be able to combat
Mm,
that, you have to be able to combat that with a similar level of access. Otherwise,
mm.
one's going to win over the other just by virtue of you can go to it easier.
And that's exactly why the system hasn't designed that for the people. And that's why I did.
It's awesome. I can't wait to check the app out. When's it supposed to launch?
It's launching next week actually. So, what date can we say? So the second or third week of January. And again, that's going to be in the US. And if we're talking about Australia, it'll probably be a few weeks after that. Again, depending on when this is released, when someone's listening to it, it may be available. If it's not, then just give it a few days or a few weeks, and you'll probably see it available very shortly.
Okay, so late Jan, early February.
Mm.
Cool. One other thing I'm interested in your thoughts on, which I've really noticed lately, is this huge rise of gambling influencers on social media, particularly Instagram, where it's big here in Australia, but I've seen a lot of it in America too, where you've got young guys and girls as well, who their whole thing is that they gamble and they go to play on the pokies, or they do online blackjack, a lot of online gambling, and talk about access. The rise of online gambling now. It used to be difficult in Australia, but now the online casino in Australia is a thing too, which is just like somehow making the worst situation even worse, because now people don't even have
Mm.
to go to a venue. But the popularity of gambling influences online, where it'll be someone playing a machine, inevitably getting the feature and, winning $1,000 and then gambling it, and then either finishing the video up $5,000 or losing it all, right? And then they'll have
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of followers, and then they'll get hundreds and hundreds of comments of people positively reinforcing it, basically, like admiring the gambling or talking about all the reasons why it's good. And I've just noticed that lately, and I'm wondering what you think about the impact that has, particularly on young men watching those videos of other young men going to the pub and winning $5,000 doing it
Yeah.
regularly. What does that do to your own thinking around what's possible and why it might actually be a good idea to go and gamble?
I mean, that's all smoke and mirrors, right? And what, like to your point, what we're seeing is the win. What we're not seeing is the cost or the loss, and that's not being shown strategically. And that's basically all kind of maybe you could say it's all kind of the operating or marketing expenses that the influencer is paying into it, because maybe they have other sponsors. I don't know all the specific folks you're talking about, but maybe they have other
Well,
sponsorships or
they actually
financial
get sponsored.
interests.
They actually get sponsored
Yeah,
by the gambling company. So now what I see commonly is there's young guys in Australia who will go and gamble at venues, and then halfway through the video, at the end of the video, they'll do a plug to their online casino that's sponsoring them as a
yeah.
way to get people to not only go and gamble at venues, but to sign up to the online gambling.
Then that's exactly right then. So those are just all operating expenses and marketing expenses that we don't see. And then are they really making money on gambling? No. But are the influencers making money from the gambling industry? Yes. Are they playing a role in the system and the machine? Yes, they are. And that's kind of a new way that may be taking place now. And what impact would it have? It's going to create more of that vicarious looking at someone else, right? Like you can't manufacture what's going to happen when you gamble for the first time or for the first few times, but you can manufacture what someone sees. And if that's what they see and they learn vicariously all the things that we talked about before, when you win from gambling, what lessons it actually teaches you, then what is it likely to do? Again, that's all a part of the machine, right? And how that plays out. And now this is just another manifestation of it. And influencers are one form, celebrities are another too. And there's a lot of people. Put it this way: in the gambling industry, there's a lot of money to play with, basically. When it comes to marketing and everything else. In the recovery industry that I'm in, it's pretty much nothing. Ultimately, it's a funny thing. Like it's like, when we say like people who are gambling, they're going up against the house, but they're also going up against the house edge. So the house, the fact that the casino, the apps, the operators, they've got unlimited funds compared to you, and then the house edge being that the way it's all been designed mathematically in the long run, there's no way you're going to come out on top. Well, it's a funny thing. Like in the recovery industry, it's kind of similar. The similar feeling that I have is we're going up against the same thing, because ultimately you have all this easy money that's going around to facilitate more of the problem, and then very little of that. We talked about how such a little amount of that money is going towards the solutions, but they're not even real solutions at the end of the day. So it's just how the game works. And I would ask, like, anyone who's watching these videos, I'd be asking that same question. Like, what game are they playing? What game do you want to play? And ultimately, what are you trying to achieve, with your, because a lot of the motivation someone would have when they're seeing these things would be great motivations, right? Like, I want to be ahead. I want to have more money. I want to have more opportunities. Maybe I want to be an influencer too. But unfortunately, the way that's been designed is very deceptive, and that will not get you to where you need to be, to where you want to be, to where you deserve to be. I can guarantee you that.
Another thing that's interesting, if you look at these posts, the comments section, people are very eagerly defending gambling. Was reading the comments on the post about all those pokies losses, and there's 100 comments of people saying skill issue, like basically blaming the person who'd lost the money and saying like, oh, well, they suck at gambling and that's their fault.
We're saying all these people, right? But I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because I heard a few days ago, maybe half of what we're seeing is not even people, it's bots. So ultimately, where is this message coming from? Who's even behind it? Who's paying for the message? Is it a part of the system even that you've got people, quote unquote? I don't know. We can't really verify those things, but are they people? You kind of said it may look like people, but we really don't know at the end of the day. And I wouldn't be surprised. Again, think about kind of the cover up that you have to do if you're in the system, right? And how the machine has to work. You have to be able to have that sort of that social reputation laundering that we alluded to earlier. You have to make it seem a certain way. That's why ultimately for me, a lot of this stuff is smoke and mirrors. A lot of it is things that are taking place behind the scenes that we don't know enough about and that aren't going to be transparent. And ultimately, we have to ask ourselves these questions, I think, to try to come out of something that is just so devastating for so many people now.
Yeah. You're so right. The social illusion of it has to be there, because if in any other context you were just robbing vulnerable people of billions of dollars every day and decimating people's lives, driving them to suicide, then there should be a national inquiry into that thing, and you would think do everything in our power to make sure that we stop that, because it's obviously insanely harmful. But that's why there needs to work so hard to have this veneer around it of like, oh, how fun is this? Imagine winning this. How good would it be? You could have this dream, this fantasy right here. It's right within reach. They have to like work so hard on that and show the positive side of it to try to take away from the completely sick reality of what's actually happening there.
You're exactly right.
While you've been developing this app, are you still working as a psychologist day to day?
No, I'm not actively practicing, and I've had to put my focus into building this app and doing it in a way, as I mentioned, that's outside of that system, because I really, I really want to get something into the hands of all the people who need it, and do it in a way that is not influenced by other conflicts of interest that are happening within that system. So for me, I've really had to dedicate to this and kind of be less active in the practice itself.
And the app, does it cost money? How accessible is it for people?
We're making it a very affordable, low-cost solution, which, again, let's compare it to a free solution that may not be particularly effective with a low-cost solution that's more effective, that if you're paying maximum of low hundreds a year for that could potentially save thousands or tens of thousands or even more. Could that be helpful? That's kind of the perspective that I have around it, because we've developed it outside of that system. It is a product part of our as part of our company, and then ultimately we're driven by the mission of helping people to overcome gambling, and also but beyond that too. So we've started with gambling addiction recovery support, but ultimately we want to be able to help people who are struggling with pornography or gaming or social media, and the list goes on, all of the other behavioral and digital addictions that are now available and that people are getting caught up in and trapped in a lot of the same ways. So what you'll see from us hopefully is we're starting with gambling. We're going to go beyond that. And then folks can maybe then see a similar approach with what we've discussed today about how solutions could actually help people come out of gambling, and have that approach also for other addictions that may be devastating and harmful that people are experiencing.
Brilliant, mate. I've checked out the website. I'll put the link in the show notes so people can go and check that out. And I'm sure as soon as the app's released, it'll be available on there. I'm looking forward to checking it out myself. It sounds like sounds pretty groundbreaking in a number of ways in terms of everything that you're bringing together, and the flexibility of it, and obviously your own background. It sounds like just what we need. So thank you for going out on a limb and thinking outside the box, and fighting the man to try to make something happen here to change things, because we need radical action like that, because just banging our head against the wall doing the same thing hasn't been working, and meanwhile the beast is just getting hungrier. So credit to you, mate, for doing this.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on the show.
That's it for this episode. If you like what we're all about, support us by following Young Blood Men's Mental Health on Instagram and Young Blood Mental Health on TikTok. Every podcast episode is recorded in professional quality video, and they're all up on our Young Blood Men's Mental Health YouTube channel. So please show some love and subscribe. You can find everything there is to know about the podcast at youngbloodmensmentalhealth.com. And most importantly, please share these stories with anyone in your life who needs to know they're not alone. We're all in this together. Catch you next time.